It happened unexpectedly for everyone. A new leader has rallied Americans against Trump. The White House chief is at the bottom of the polls, a stab in the back and a scandal he'll pay dearly for. In Washington, they're frantically preparing the seat for a new master. Breaking news is coming in one after another. Putin has opened the door to his own nightmare. Ukraine outplayed the Russians at the front and in the rear. Syrsky revealed shocking details from the front lines. The Ukrainian army is picking up the pace. Russian soldiers are stuck in the heart of hell. Putin cancels the deadline for seizing Donbas. You have to see this? A new hunter for Shaheds. Ukraine has launched an unprecedented beast into the sky. Now a fully autonomous and undeniable defense. The world gives a standing ovation. And all of this happened right now. Hello, I'm Daryna Gutskalo and we're getting started. The explosion in the White House has indeed thundered. Donald Trump is rapidly losing power and approval ratings have dropped to critical levels. Analysts are starting to sound the alarm.
Polls now show that President Trump's disapproval rating among voters who do not belong to his far-right base is growing rapidly. According to Fox polls, 61% of voters disapprove of his performance.
And here a new player appears on the scene. Trump has gained a new, unexpected opponent. While his political positions weaken into the game, Pope Leo XIV, the first American pontiff, enters more actively. In the West, they're already saying his public disagreement with Trump could seriously hit the U.S. president before the election and further shake his influence.
I'm not afraid of the Trump administration or speaking out loudly about the gospel message, which is why I believe I am here.
Alarming signals are already reaching Washington offices and Donald Trump is losing the battle for American sympathies. Pope Leo XIV has left the U.S. president far behind in terms of support. According to poll results, the Pope's net favorability rating is plus 32, while Trump's is minus 22. And most importantly, 60 million American Catholics are increasingly leaning toward the pontiff.
The conflict, born from Trump's desire for hype and narcissism, could cost Republicans dearly this fall.
There's no point in hiding it. The Kremlin has personally launched the scenario of its main nightmare. The Ukrainian army is only gaining strength and explosions are increasingly heard on Russian territory. Moreover, Syrsky has just announced new successes of our military.
The enemy's activity has decreased significantly. I won't say by half, but by 1/3 for sure.
The Russians' front is narrowing right before our eyes. The commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine emphasized that the number of the enemy's active offensive directions has significantly decreased from 13 to 7, and only 4 of them remain truly primary. The tactic of targeted attempts to hold the initiative is finally slipping from the occupiers' hands. Syrsky also noted that the size of the Russian grouping is decreasing and currently stands at 722,000 troops, including the operational reserve. The situation at the front has changed thanks to strikes by Ukraine's defense forces on Russian enemy logistics and bridges. Ukraine continues to keep aces up its sleeve.
The bridge on the Mariupol-Donetsk highway near Kremenivka, which was already damaged by strikes earlier, was finished off today.
Currently, vehicle traffic from Mariupol towards Donetsk via this bridge is impossible. Apparently, Putin's plans have collapsed again at the most unexpected moment. At this moment, Ukraine has once again surprised Russia with an unprecedented technological response. Our engineers have showcased a new weapon against aerial terror. The Syrsky unmanned interceptor is already prepared to automatically locate, catch up with, and destroy enemy drones. Now, very difficult times are beginning for the enemy's Shaheds.
The complex is designed to intercept fast and maneuverable aerial threats and has the following technical specifications. Speed, over 340 kilometers per hour, operational altitude, up to 6 kilometers, flight time, up to 20 minutes, operational radius, 30 kilometers.
And these are far from all the advantages of the new Ukrainian Predator. Syrsky costs up to $2,000. This price is the lowest among interceptors with automatic detection and homing systems. However, it seems our engineers decided not to stop there and are already announcing the arrival of Syrsky 2.0. According to forecasts, this interceptor drone will be able to start a revolution in the sky, making protection from enemy targets as autonomous and safe as possible for combat crews.
The updated version will feature automatic deployment of the interceptor to the target detection zone and enhanced thermal imaging optics, allowing machine vision to detect enemy drones at a distance of 2 kilometers. Also, the new version will integrate improved detection and guidance algorithms, additional communication solutions, and a system for automatic detonation of the warhead near the target.
This happened unexpectedly for everyone. While the Kremlin celebrated prematurely, Washington unexpectedly flipped the chessboard. The White House sharply changed its tone regarding Ukraine, and the statements now coming from the US could cost Putin dearly. What is behind this political U-turn, and why has Moscow already started to get nervous? Let's take a look.
Hearing something positive about Ukraine at open American briefings or in interviews was impossible not so long ago. And not because of the mood. I heard from several communicators about a tacit request saying, "We are in the process of negotiations, don't provoke Moscow." And now suddenly there are statements and quotes that you just don't expect. Secretary of State Rubio, on board a plane on the way to China, gives an interview to Fox News. And in a conversation with Sean Hannity, he speaks completely without reservations.
The Ukrainian armed forces are currently the strongest and most powerful army in all of Europe. And that's a fact. Thanks both to the aid they've received and to the combat experience they've gained on the battlefield.
And right there, Rubio cites a figure. Russia is losing 5 times more than the Ukrainians. At the G7 summit in Evian, France, a meeting between Trump and Zelensky. After the meeting, and this is key, Trump tells reporters, the conversation was very, very good. And the G7 leaders in a joint statement acknowledged that Ukraine's position on the battlefield has improved. Gdansk, Poland, a Ukrainian dinner on the eve of a major international recovery conference. A speech by Deputy Secretary of State Jeremy Levin, featuring words never heard before, even from retired officials, let alone active ones.
At this moment, we are in a situation where Ukraine is winning the war. Previously, Ukrainian forces waited for winter because the Russians slowed their offensives in winter. Now it's the opposite. The Ukrainians are on the offensive and the Russians are waiting for winter.
Ukraine is winning the war. From the mouth of a State Department official, it hasn't sounded this blunt since the start of Trump's second term. And finally, just the other day, Donald Trump in the Oval Office. A journalist asks him a direct question, and we hear.
Zelensky is doing quite well, no matter how you look at it. At least he's not giving up ground. Despite heavy losses on both sides, he's doing well. You have to give him credit. He's brave, he has great weaponry, but he also has great people, he has fighters.
And this is the same Trump who, just 6 months ago in that same Oval Office, told Zelensky he had no trump cards. What happened? And why has the White House's position changed so noticeably? There are, as is often the case, several reasons at once. But the main one, explains Americanist expert James Boyce, is the election factor.
We are currently in the very heat of the election campaign. Americans are choosing candidates who will run in the November congressional elections. And the administration is doing everything to lower the tension around the Persian Gulf and the crazy gas prices. Because Americans, in the end, vote with their wallets. When they see the cost of living rising, it hits those in power. And grand politics can, at least partially, shift voters' attention away from these problems.
Voters have always seen a sharp, uncompromising, tough Trump. That's how they love him, that's how they support him. But now that toughness is gone, when even with Iran, which they threaten to wipe out completely, they're negotiating and playing nice. To say nothing of Moscow.
Trump is now renouncing everything he built his political career on. And that is exactly why there is such anxiety within his own base, among his voters. They look at this and they say, listen, where is that guy we actually voted for? We did not vote for this or for the person we are seeing on television right now.
And so, in government talking points, they have unblocked messages and topics that were not there before. And that is why the rhetoric has changed right before our eyes. Politicians very often use words to replace real actions. But following the rhetoric, the policy toward Russia must also change. In any case, there is a public demand for this as well. From Washington, Dmytro Anopchenko, Syrsky Koval, American Bureau of Inter-TV Channel, United News Marathon.
At this very moment, Lukashenko is starting a double game. It seems Minsk is again trying to sit on several chairs at once without falling. Words of apology addressed to Zelensky and words of appeal to the Russian ambassador. Belarus is on the edge of an abyss where every step toward Moscow will inevitably lead to a painful fall. Batka is trying his best to maneuver. Ukraine has warned Kiev's patience has a limit. Ultimately, whose side will Lukashenko take, and will he dare to finally break Putin's snares? Let's watch.
Alexander Lukashenko is in a political zugzwang. Ukraine demands an end to the assistance for the Russian army. The Kremlin wants more involvement in the war.
Well, the dilemma for Lukashenko is indeed quite serious.
Any move by the Belarusian dictator only worsens his position. So Lukashenko talks about good neighborliness.
Our position, Andrei, so you clearly understand, is in fact a peaceful one.
Well, and immediately swears his loyalty to the Kremlin.
But in any situation, we will stand right beside Russia.
Lukashenko speaks of his reluctance to go to war.
Belarus is quite vulnerable in military terms. If Ukraine were to start attacking Belarus in the same way that it attacks Russia, then...
While at the same time threatening the Ukrainian president's representatives who supposedly came for talks.
I say you tell your president, if he thinks he can talk to us like that he will drag us into the war, then he must understand that the nature of the war will change instantly.
Lukashenko's left hand knows exactly what the right one is doing, and he himself is squirming like an eel to avoid getting caught on the hook.
Lukashenko is trying to maneuver. And in one way or another, you should always make sure to avoid crossing those important red lines for good.
Ukraine has clearly marked them as Belarus continues to assist Russia.
The use of the Belarusian defense industry. Serving as a repair base, the Belarusian arsenals have been important for replenishing Russian tanks and other armored vehicles. The use of Belarusian training grounds as a base has also been significant. There are also many other aspects involved.
Belarus has installed quite a few towers on its territory toward our border, where in fact repeaters and other technical equipment were later placed. Also, at certain times, the deployment of electronic intelligence equipment was also recorded there.
Russia used this equipment for drone strikes against Ukraine. Volodymyr Zelensky gave a clear signal. Minsk must remove the signal repeaters.
He clearly stated that we know all the weak spots on the territory of Belarus. All those places that pose a threat to us, meaning military facilities, as well as oil refinery sites. And we clearly said that you have a certain amount of time to decide.
Currently, the repeaters are not operating. This would seem to confirm a de-escalation by official Minsk. But it's more likely about the instinct for self-preservation.
The fact that Lukashenko went so far as to turn off these repeaters simply shows he's not suicidal. He sees perfectly well who, what, and how strikes are being carried out against Russian territory and how effective these strikes are.
And if you project all these efforts onto the territory of Belarus, it becomes clear that everything there will be much simpler.
At the same time, Belarus is completing roads and bases along the border with Ukraine. And this is military infrastructure.
There is an actual buildup of various military infrastructure facilities, including training grounds and bases where personnel can be stationed.
But for Putin, this is not enough. Western media report that the Kremlin seeks to use Belarusian territory as a springboard to expand hostilities. Possible scenarios include launching drones from Belarus and attempting to open an additional front in the north.
To pull some Ukrainian troops away from the active part of the front, which stretches over 1,200 kilometers, to pull more to the north to focus more attention on this direction.
Moscow is also interested in the Belarusian army, which, though lacking combat experience, is still trained.
They are also getting reinforcements for the occupying forces from the ranks of the Belarusian army.
Of course, the Kremlin denies putting pressure on Lukashenko. At the same time, they claim they are ready to respond to any threats against Minsk.
Since March 2025, a treaty between the Russian Federation and the Republic of Belarus has been in effect on security guarantees within the framework of the Union State, and if necessary, we are ready to take the full range of measures.
But these security guarantees are a double-edged sword. Analysts at the American Institute for the Study of War believe the Kremlin could use the Union State structure to replenish its army with Belarusians. According to the document, citizens of both countries have formally equal status and therefore equal military obligations. But this is exactly the scenario that Minsk wants to avoid at all costs. And this was confirmed by Defense Minister Kremlin.
There is no military sense in us getting involved in the conflict or, as they say, allowing ourselves to be dragged into it.
But Moscow is provoking. A clear example is the story of the young footballers from Gomel. A drone attacked a bus carrying a team from the Bryansk region. The Russians immediately claimed it was Ukrainian.
I have no doubt that this was the work of Russian special services. In other words, they are artificially fueling a potential conflict between Belarus and Ukraine.
Such attempts will continue, but Lukashenko knows what is at stake.
For him, providing assistance to Russia can often mean, in reality, being dragged into that kind of major, large-scale war that he is determined to avoid, since it could ultimately cost him his political power and, in the end, even his life.
The Belarusian dictator is trapped. On one hand, he fears Ukraine's long-range strikes.
Well, as they stated, they have already identified 500 such targets on Belarusian territory.
On the other hand, the proxy state's dependence on the Kremlin is deepening.
Belarus has become Russia's direct rear, supplying its defense industry and being integrated into it.
That is why the self-proclaimed president keeps repeating.
We need to negotiate on the merits. No need to make a scene, no need to shout, no need to try and punch someone in the face, and so on.
But peaceful rhetoric does not work if Lukashenko continues to help the aggressor. So Europe no longer sees the Belarusian direction as neutral, and NATO countries are strengthening the eastern flank. Germany is deploying an armored brigade of about 5,000 troops in Lithuania. Yevgenia Tereshchenko, We Are Ukraine, United News Marathon.
Very difficult times are beginning for occupied Crimea. It seems Ukraine has taken on the peninsula from a new angle, through fuel and logistics. After strikes by the armed forces, gasoline is disappearing from stations, supplies are bursting at the seams, and Russian authorities no longer hide that the situation is becoming critical. The fuel blockade of Crimea is only gaining momentum, and the Russian Black Sea Fleet is watching the situation with fear and praying that Ukraine's defense forces do not reach them. What surprise has Ukraine ultimately prepared for the enemy for dessert? More on that in a moment.
Repressions are beginning against those who filmed damaged objects and the shaky performance of Russian air defenses. For instance, in Volgograd, residents were detained for filming the aftermath of a missile attack on the night of June 27th. There, the target of Ukrainian Flamingo missiles was the Titan Barikady Research and Production Center. This plant manufactures launchers for Yars and Topol-M strategic missile systems, Iskander-M systems, as well as artillery components and barrels for Mesta-S self-propelled guns. According to preliminary data, after 5 missiles were launched, 3 objects on the enterprise's territory were hit at once. Meanwhile, multi-kilometer lines for gasoline are now a daily reality for all of Russia, both in those regions of Siberia where oil is extracted, and in the Moscow region, and despite these restrictions, the lines are growing every day. The Kremlin is frantically hauling in gas from everywhere, including near Moscow, to hide the capital's collapse. But for weeks now, Moscow itself has been facing a catastrophic fuel shortage. I was in line. You should have waited. Move your car, damn it, get out of here. Come on, I'm asking you nicely, just move. What's it to you? There's a line here, damn it, you idiot. And while some start fights in lines, those lucky enough to refuel rejoice over a 20 to 30 liter tank. Almost as much as winning $1 million in the lottery. We're really rich. Officially, gas can only go into the car's tank, no canisters allowed. But Russians know prices will soon skyrocket, so those with connections and means are literally sucking all the fuel out of the gas stations.
He just took everything, and after that, they ended up closing the station for good, and that was really all there was to it. There you go.
How is it that there's no gas for anyone else, but you're here filling up canisters?
With coupons, huh? With coupons?
What, are they using coupons in Krasnodar now? That's the first I've heard of it.
In the Krasnodar region itself, the Slavyansk oil refinery continues to burn. It's 300 kilometers from our border. It, along with the Yaroslavl refinery, 700 kilometers from Ukraine, were hit by Ukrainian drones on the night of June 28th. The smoke plume from the Slavyansk refinery, seen in satellite images, stretched for over 100 kilometers. Additionally, other locations in the Krasnodar region were struck. The airfield in Slavyansk on Kuban, local oil production sites, and a fuel depot in Poltavskaya.
I'm lighting up, just chilling out for a bit. Anyway, guys, I just called to order some gas, because you can't buy it at stations anymore. Now you have to order directly from the refinery, and the minimum amount you can get is 5 tons. So it's a bit of a change, honestly.
The Slavyansk refinery processes about 5 million tons of crude per year. That's 9% of all petroleum products in the southern federal district. Specifically, this refinery is the main fuel supplier to occupied Crimea, which has faced acute shortages for a month. Also, due to Ukrainian strikes, the peninsula has recently lacked power and faces major water issues. However, Crimeans are trying to be as careful as possible when discussing their hardships. More and more, the peninsula is reminded of criminal liability for sharing videos and photos of hit targets.
I'm stocking up, getting water, food. We're all hoarding as much as we can.
Moscow pretends not to notice the catastrophic situation in Crimea. But 3 days ago, Kremlin puppets on the occupied peninsula declared a state of emergency amid the crisis, with fuel and shortages of water and power. Gauleiter Aksionov urged Crimeans to stay calm and assured them they would break through, but didn't specify exactly where to. In fact, fuel in Crimea is no longer sold to private car owners. And those lucky few who do find it at gas stations face daily price hikes. Prices change so often that the numbers aren't even on the boards anymore, but written on slips of paper at the register. So the price of 95 is already nearing 150 rubles, and diesel is hitting 200. For those looking to fill their tanks illegally, the cost can reach as high as 500 rubles. The Times reports that Kyiv is rapidly increasing air pressure on the peninsula, which holds strategic and political significance for Russia. As the British media notes, the blockade began with attacks on Russian air defense systems. And then Ukraine moved on to strikes against supply routes and energy facilities.
Kyiv is using increasingly effective medium-range weapons for attacks on Russian bases and supply lines. The goal of the campaign is to force the Kremlin to negotiate by threatening Russia's control over Crimea.
The fuel crisis in Crimea began after Ukrainian drones restricted movement on the land bridge to Crimea, the so-called pride of the Kremlin, the Novorossiya highway along the Sea of Azov. Running through territories occupied in 2022, it was considered one of the main logistics routes. Now, traveling this corridor from Rostov-on-Don, especially for the occupiers' military vehicles and fuel trucks, has become extremely dangerous. Oh, it actually hit right here in this exact spot. The current air and logistics siege of the peninsula is tied to Kyiv's main goal, returning Crimea to Ukrainian control. The Western press writes, "Our armed forces have already carried out an equally complex and daring operation, liberating the strategically important Snake Island. Tomorrow, Ukraine will mark the second anniversary of its return to its territory. On the very first day of the full-scale war, the attack on the island and the Ukrainian border guards' response to the Russian warship Moskva, which was soon sunk, became one of the slogans of our struggle against the invaders." Oleksandr Muzhichuk, Podrobici, Inter TV channel.
And that concludes our broadcast. We're continuing to follow the latest events right now to be the first to bring them to you. Don't forget to subscribe. See you.